As our lives become busier and more complicated than ever, we could all use an escape here and there. That's why WDAV Classical Public Radio has curated a classical oasis that's a tap away anytime you need to breathe a sigh of relief. At the WDAV mobile app, you can stream WDAV's 24/7 classical music programming on demand from anywhere you are. Check out past episodes of shows that celebrate classical music's remarkable diversity, like WDAV's bilingual program Concierto and Noteworthy, the series hosted by yours truly. You'll also get access to a great variety of podcast episodes, blog articles, and more that shine a spotlight on the music and arts you love. Download the WDAV mobile app now at wdav.org/app. Or if you're in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, tune your radio to 89.9 FM. Take a deep breath and enjoy. I'm Loki Karuna, and this is TRILLOQUY. Thanks so much for tuning in to the podcast built to decolonize classical music. It's a big job that can only be accomplished through generations of effort, so I'm glad to do my tiny little part in every way that I do, and I appreciate your being here to bear witness to the conversations that expand the way so-called classical music has been engaged in the past. It's interesting that there's so much resistance movement-based media out there right now these days, examples of what it looks like to push back against oppressive systems. I'm thinking about the Handmaid's Tale that's on right now, also Andor that Dell is really into. I'm thinking about the show The Last of Us, people fighting back against armies of mushroom zombies, and even the movie Sinners that everyone is talking about. I saw it last week with today's guest, so I'm going to speak on what's been brewing in my mind as it relates to the premises of those bits of media and how we can apply them to resisting against what we have to resist against. I'll tackle that in today's TRILLOQUY. But for now, it's my great pleasure to welcome back to the TRILLOQUY podcast, the incomparable Curtis Stewart. I have to admit that this was supposed to come out a few days ago, but the sickness caught me. There's something going around as the seasons change. So I'm just now getting back on my feet, but this is coming out just in time for his latest performance. As I record this, it's the middle of the Gateways Music Festival. All of the Rochester, New York events took place earlier this week, with the New York City events kicking off tonight with Curtis's performance of his work titled Seasons of Change. Curtis went out to Arizona and engaged some people experiencing houselessness and created a piece that touches on that issue, that touches on climate change's impact on people experiencing houselessness and how all of these issues can be solved or at least engaged through an Afrofuturistic lens that honors the musical history of America. It's pretty deep, but I think Curtis does a great job of unpacking it all in our dialogue. We don't have any Seasons of Change recordings just yet, since it's just premiered and is having its New York City premiere tonight. But I will share a little from Curtis's last Grammy-nominated album, Of Love, to get us into the conversation. This track is called Krishna, which is an improvisation on Alice Coltrane's Krishna, Krishna. Shout out to all the Hindus out there. I hope you enjoyed these sounds and our dialogue. I'll share more on the other side.
I fight to portray the life I left, the dreams I kept tucked inside. Through my art, survey my pain. She says, sorry, I can't stay.
Our last interview was right before I got the artistic director position at the ACO.
Isn't that convenient?
Isn't that convenient? And it was before I had been commissioned by several orchestras. I had been working with Eric Jacobson quite a bit with the Virginia Symphony, and then that happened with Gil Shaham in spring 2023. Um, and I just realized that prior to that moment, I had been kind of planting an like an unconscious garden of work. Like I had been composing, I had been working, I had been practicing my own music. I had a vision for what I wanted to be as an individual, but I didn't, for some reason, have the belief that I, as an individual, could follow through on it. So I was very happy um, expressing myself through teaching, expressing myself through public quartet, expressing myself through etc. And I think once I got that, that one spot in that Grammy solo performance, other people started to see who I could be with more specificity than I did.
Mhm.
And so people were asking me to do things that I didn't ever conceive myself doing,
Yeah,
like writing symphonic work.
it's interesting that you mentioned that that Grammy performance because I think that was what your previous interview here on Triloquy was about, and this idea that it's not really classical music and unpacking those dialogues. I wonder how that's sitting with you years later. It seems like you're getting your revenge on the on the industry.
Yeah, that's basically right. I am. It is kind of like that. Basically, the worst thing you could do to me is tell me I can't do something. That's like the thing. That gives me a purpose, unfortunately. And actually, now that I feel like I have kind of established what I can do, I am thinking about what is my vision of what is it that I want to do? What is the positive impact that I'd like to have? I think the work that I've done since then has had a positive impact in that it's, you know, basically every argument for why someone would call my work not classical, I've tried to attack through my work. So whether that meant score or no scores, okay, great. I put it all in a score format, or is it orchestral? Is it a quote unquote classical ensemble? Okay, it's all. Is it improvised or not? Okay, great. I removed that. Does it have electronics or not? I removed that. So I think I've buttoned up the holes in my side of the argument of, and so I think now that the ship is a little tighter, I can step forward and create my vision. Hopefully in a more bulletproof way, but I realize that that can't be the whole goal. I have to really envision like I have to envision something positive for people other than myself, which
Mhm.
I sometimes have a hard time doing because I don't want to assume what everybody else wants to do. I can only work through what I want to do. For example, I actually just listened to some of the Gateways. There was a little PR thing blip that they put up a little chunk from of Power, which is like very much layered electronics. You don't know what is live, etc. And I was like, wow, that's cool. I forgot about that. And I was like, maybe I need to go back to that, go back to that sense of curiosity and just playfulness with sound, and stop worrying about, you know, plugging bullet holes.
When you talk about buttoning holes and that sort of thing, I can't help but to think about the administrative side of the work that you do that many people do not see. I've personally gotten a perspective on the space between art and administration for
Oh
arts
yeah.
administrators.
Oh yeah.
I wonder how you've been juggling that, not only with ACO. I'm sure there's administration that goes into your work with public quartet, your
Mhm.
own personal works. How do you balance the art and the administration of it all?
So my first interaction with quote unquote administration was through teaching, managing 5 orchestras and like having to grade every kid and giving them all very specific feedback so they all felt like they were learning.
Mhm.
Um, and so that was my first thing. And then I moved over to Juilliard where I was, managing some 120 chamber groups, and they all they all had their issues trying to make sure
And
they
they were all
met
perfect.
deadlines and handed in papers, and then some groups actually had very visionary thoughts about what type of new music they want to do and just making it happen, making Reich 6 pianos happen
Mhm.
in the school. And then I realized, so as I was doing my own work, I realized the power of organization for myself. And I realized how I was quite organized for myself. I knew what I was doing, but if anybody else at a glance were to look, they would see it as a mess. And even now, for example, on my website or when I send people to my, sample scores and things, I have to remember to simplify times 100 because I'm not just thinking about what I created, but I'm thinking about what I will be creating in the future and after that. So I realized the power of administration and the power of like really quick, efficient organization, simplicity. So I think I'm not sure if I have struck a balance. I'm kind of, we're all gasping for breath over here, trying to do something, trying to make time for rest every day.
Hmm.
But in the time, I find value in like all the administration that I do is of value because it sharpens my chops in being able to make my vision clearer to others, so that they can say, "Oh yeah, we love working with Curtis. Oh, it's so easy. Boom." We know that he's going to show up. We know that things are going to be on time, if not early, etc. So I think I see it as like a skill builder.
Yeah. And, on top of your artistry and the administrative things you've been able to do that have built up your career, I've really enjoyed having a front row seat uh, of that growth next to an engagement of who you are as a human being. It's one thing to be a world-class musician in our context, and at least in 2025, it's another thing to be a world-class musician who is Black. And that's largely why you've been engaged by the Gateways Festival Orchestra. I wonder, how this upcoming engagement with Gateways speaks to or engages the way that you think about yourself in that way.
Hmm. Um, well, I the only time I have to think about it is when I'm doing something that I question whether or not it interacts with my identity or my Blackness. Like for example, I just played a work by a seminal composer, and I just had this existential crisis of like, why am I playing this? There's so many, there's so many other people I should be playing. I felt bad. Like I had to say yes to the gig. It was a good gig. It was a fun gig. It was a piece that I thought I wanted on paper. I was like, oh, I would love to play this. But as I was digging into it, I was like, wow, this is a lot of hours of work. This is a lot of time. This is a lot of sacrifice made for this composer that helps me potentially, because people know the work, so therefore they trust that if I were to play it well, they might think that I play it, that they would trust my work more.
Mhm.
But I'm
Interesting.
wondering if that is worth it. I can't tell. I think it because I'm very into cutting my teeth. I'm into like doing the thing I need to do right now so that I can invest in the future. That's what I mean by that kind of like unconscious garden that
Right.
you know, I'm because I don't know what I will want to do in the future. I'm okay with cutting my teeth now and buckling in. But the amount of work that went into working on that specific piece, I'm just thinking about how many other things I could have written, how many people I could have commissioned, how many other things I could have done with that time, much I could have done with that time. So the only time I really think about, because other than that, I just feel like I'm just playing the music that I love to play, which naturally, hopefully, comes from who I am, which
Mhm.
is, a New Yorker, but also like a African American male,
As as a
in
Black man.
as a black man. Yeah.
That's an interesting point you're making, though, about, your ability to play X means that people will trust your music greater. It's my sense that you've done that in many ways. It's one thing I don't know what piece you're talking about. Let's just say it's the Beethoven. It's one thing to perfectly play the Beethoven concerto, but you've put so much time and energy into composers like Julia Perry as
Right.
well. I feel like as we talk about the living composer versus the dead composer, the Black composer versus the white, the woman, all of these different things, the point that you're trying to make through your performance can be achieved through an engagement of Black music. It doesn't have to be the European canon.
No, it's true. It's very true. Um, and it, well, I think about the like Yo-Yo Ma's of the world, Yo-Yo Ma can pretty much roll up to any orchestra and say he wants to play anything, and
Mhm.
they'll say yes. That's so, I don't, it's okay for me to envision my career. That's my like, gold standard of where I'd like to be. Not that I will ever achieve it, not that I won't achieve it, but that is my vision. That's where I'm pointing towards. So, um, there is so much, unfortunately, in my experience currently, there is so much we have to do to, for example, with the Julia Perry, I have played it several times, but I played it with the same conductor and the same orchestra several times.
Mhm.
You know, we recorded it with the same orchestra several times. Not several times, but we recorded with the same orchestra. And that's not true. It's just, there was two orchestras, but the same conductor for both.
Yep.
So it's and for me, I would love to hear so many. I can imagine various violinists playing that piece with various orchestras. All the Alban Berg specialists, the people who love the Schoenberg concerto, the people who do that type of modernism, kind of late early modernism thing. So yes, it's true. We can. I guess what I'm saying is not that it's not about can I or can't I, but will I
Mhm.
will I be engaged? Will I be hired to do that or not?
Mhm.
And so, like, if Beethoven and Bernstein and Mozart and Julia Perry are on the table, I think it gives Julia Perry more of a shot to be programmed.
Yeah, yeah. And now you get to be that person. The next time, the Royal Scottish Symphony Orchestra wants to do
Yeah,
Julia
right.
Perry, you're the person to call. Who
Maybe.
else?
Yeah, maybe or not. I also don't feel like it has to be me. Unfortunately, actually, I kind of hope it would be someone else because I think because they're listening to that recording, they would have so much more critical. They could do it. They wouldn't have a choice but to do it better because they would have this thing to reference. I didn't have anything to reference before playing that thing,
Mhm.
and there's so much that we had to add and so much love we had to give to it there was so much work that went into even just making the parts because the parts were illegible. So anyway,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, speaking of being critical, I would love to go back and talk a little bit about your parents.
Oh, geez.
I had the great pleasure of chatting with your dad down in Washington D.C. for your Sphinx Medal of Excellence ceremony. It seems like growing up, I guess I could ask you what was it like growing up, but I'm more curious about what your home sounded like. I mean, when you were a little kid, you must have all of these memories of just violin playing, tuba playing, jazz recordings, all sorts of stuff just filling your home.
Yeah, every Sunday was rhythm review. The WBGO jazz station would do the, rhythm and blues songs from the 50s and 60s that my dad would always listen to. I was always hearing that. I was hearing him practicing, and I was hearing him talk about how he practiced, because he revolutionized how tuba was played in that scenario. And he's kind of, no matter who I talk to in New York City and pretty much anywhere, they think of him as like a luminary of brass playing in general, not just tuba, not just jazz, but just sound on that instrument, and consistency. And so I was watching him work through that, watching my mom compose, watching her process, hearing that Greek music and watching her be interested in so many kinds of music and finding it inside of her own sound. Um, so it was very colorful hearing all these things. And that is certainly my greatest privilege having them as parents. I don't think I probably would be like an accountant somewhere if it. Well, I guess it's hard to say that how you would exist if your parents were different. That doesn't make any sense. But I think I'm definitely a product of their artistry.
Coming up in that environment, it seems like you would have no choice but to see yourself as the hottest thing out there. I mean, you have all this training, you have the parents, you ended up going to Eastman. But you did, and I appreciated a story that you told about this when we were on the ground together in Indiana. You got up there to Eastman and you realized there are other very talented violinists
Yeah.
out there. I wonder what that realization means to you now as you look back
Mm.
in retrospect.
I think what it means to me now, I mean, it puts even more weight on that privilege that I had to watch my parents succeed, fail, feel pain of their both successes and failures. To like, I can see so many people that it stopped when they hit their own successes and failures. There's the possibility for that stopping their momentum forward, which is not a bad thing. It's okay if it stopped you. That's fine. You go do what you got to do. Um, but I think knowing that talent is not even like talent isn't a thing. Talent is like that's just one iota of what makes someone actually be able to put music out into the world. Well, it's one iota of what makes gives somebody the confidence to share their music,
Mhm.
and then after sharing it, to record it and put it out into the world, and after that, putting on concerts, and after that, advocating for it. Like there's so much that goes beyond being a good violinist or being a good musician, and it's kind of amazing that we're so we think of our art as having an integrity because we are good at our instruments. We have worked hard, and therefore we belong.
Mhm.
But I think the fact that we're interested, working, sharing, listening, that is what makes us beyond belong. It's not being quote unquote good. I mean, as long as once you find a sound that you feel you can own, that's all there is. Um, because I can put out a recording and feel great about it today. I can feel great about it next year, and then in 3 years I'll feel horrible about it, and then in 6 years after that I'll feel great about it again. So it doesn't matter. that Good is extremely relative.
Yeah. I found myself thinking about you. I'm reading the autobiography of Nina Simone, and
Mm,
it just got to the point where she was denied entry into the Curtis Institute. This is after
yeah.
years of private training. She did, I think, pre-college, or what we now think of as pre-college at Juilliard. And
Uh-huh.
and the last thing in the chapter, she's talking about what this meant for her in the moment. And I think the last sentence of the chapter is something like, but one thing that I did know was that I was done with music. Of course,
Mm,
we know that didn't end up being the case, but that's how she felt in the moment. I bring that up, I found myself thinking about you because I feel like a lot of people will be surprised that after you were done at Eastman, you didn't get into any of the grad schools you wanted to
right.
get into. It would have been very easy, in many people's view, again, thinking about Nina Simone, for that just to be the end, for you to, get a job, maybe even get a job as a teacher, a music teacher, as you did, but never really think about the violin or being a soloist or chamber musician anymore. All of that to ask, what kept you going? What
Mm.
is it that kept you practicing, that didn't result in your saying, well, I'm a music teacher now and that's just that?
I'm not really sure. I think I empathized a lot with my parents. I think I saw them on stage and I was like, wow, that's such a cool thing. The feeling of the from the audience, so I would watch them and I was like, oh, it's such a cool feeling. And I know this music and I feel the energy of this and the brilliance. And I hear them talking about it. And so there's the ideas in like what they say versus what actually happens. And just that such an interesting kind of process. And I think I always just wanted to be kind of cool like them.
Mhm.
They would do these concerts and organize their own concerts at the Cornelia Street Cafe and, Greenwich Village in New York, that's now gone. They would just organize their own stuff. I just wanted to, something about that felt extremely valuable. I don't know what it was. Just watching them felt like so valuable because I think I saw them owning their own expression. I saw them working hard, um, developing a band, developing a thought process around what music could and should be for them, and then trying it out and putting it into reality, and then watching them feel the value of their own creation. And I think that's what I wanted to keep doing. And so then when I didn't get into grad school, my dad kind of took me by the neck and introduced me to the head of the music ed department at Lehman College. So then I got my ed degree there. And I then happened to get that teaching job at LaGuardia because I was student teaching there, which let me be in public quartet. And so that being in public quartet is another thing. Meeting, you know, working with, being in quartet with Jesse Montgomery for 2 years will make you want to compose.
Mhm.
Improvising with these awesome people, Janina Norpoth, being in a group with Nick and Hamilton and Amanda, like, um, just makes you want to keep going. And actually, it was when individuals left to do their own thing, I was like, wait a second, I can do that too. Every time someone left, was something that sparked my own want to be an individual as well, not to leave the group, but to make sure that I was good as an individual, so that I could express myself, so that that avenue of sharing wasn't cut off.
Yeah, wow, you're really speaking to the responsibility, even if unknown, that musicians have. Seeing your parents on stage and that really being a thing for you. I'm sure that is the situation, the circumstance that you're in now, as people look up on stage at you, especially in the context of something like the Gateways Music Festival, where we're all thinking about everything that we think about when it comes to
Mm.
identity, when it comes to race, musicianship, quote unquote excellence. There's so much to unpack there. But before we get into some of that, is this your first time working with Gateways?
Oh, so I was there. So when I first got to Eastman, I think I did some work with Gateways my first and maybe my second year.
Oh,
We
nice.
did some chamber run outs to people's houses, and I think I played in one of the concerts at some point. Yeah, and it was an amazing experience just seeing that, and it was kind of cool because I had seen a lot of those players in New York because my mom was on those gigs with those players all the time. And so I was like, oh, hey, these are my New York folks, but up in Rochester. So it actually made Eastman feel a little bit more like home, despite being in a very different part of the country. Even though it's the same state, Rochester is very different than New York City.
Hmm.
So it was kind of like a home away from home at first.
So how did your most recent engagement come to be? Did they reach out, or what were the ingredients?
I think so. Alex Lang and I did an awesome project with Laura Downs. And we did this recording and we worked and we had these conversations that were the start of something that was probably 4 years ago.
Hmm.
I then ran into him again, I think at the League of American Orchestras, and we were just talking about ideas. And then he just asked me to reach out again with some more ideas, and then we just kept talking idea things. And I think that maybe happened around the same time you were talking to them as well, because then we started collaborating through American Composers Orchestra and Gateways for some composers. And then I confirmed in my mind that Seasons of Change would be my next album. Um, and so I sent that over to him as an idea, and he said, "Oh, this is perfect because it has such a deep, it touches on their community focus, their want to reach out to community and kind of reshape how classical music engages with communities."
What do you say to folks who may have been expecting of seasons or of change to go along with what you've created so
People
far?
have, the people who expect that are usually making fun of me. They
Well, I'm not.
there are some people who are like, yeah, what's next of backhand? I don't know. Yeah, I do have I have an of time in my mind, but I feel like that's going to be, I want that to be, um, there's a big idea. So again, that's like one of those, unconscious gardens that's happening because I just keep placing things in there. I have these reworking. Basically, I have this project, um, reworking the Bach chaconne with American composers. So the chaconne is made of variations, and so each variation, 8 bar to 16 bar variation, gets replaced by American contemporary American composers. And the piece would be called Dance Schematics. And I use the word replaced intentionally.
Mm.
To move towards an actual American classical music that is created by Americans, that embraces American dance, so that we can just refer to that as our classical music. Um, anyway, so that's it. And I have a thought about like improvising through some of the Bach sonatas and partitas, and then I have another idea of having a whole another verse cycle, meaning me speaking words with electronics on the nature of time and how our time is always defined by work. It's always defined. It's defined by the sun going around the earth. It's defined by how our bodies change, and that music. So that there's all these outside things changing our internal feeling. And so how does music? How can music kind of embody that?
Right. Not to mention that time is sort of the canvas that music sits on as
Yeah,
well.
right.
So it's also that. Well, in the meantime, as as you work on Of Time, we do have Seasons of Change, which I understand is inspired, maybe even a response to Vivaldi's Four Seasons. I wonder if you can say more. What is it that you're saying in Seasons of Change?
So the piece kind of started with me just messing around with the Four Seasons. I was just thinking about Nigel Kennedy's version. I was thinking about Max Richter's version. I think Nigel Kennedy has two or three versions of the Four Seasons. Um, Max Richter did a recomposition of it, and I was just thinking, I was reading the poetry of that accompanied the original Vivaldi.
Hmm.
Um, some of it's very pretty, like, oh, we love summer, summer's beautiful, etc. But some is actually quite steeped in the attitudes and kind of classism of the time, which is like, I'm in my home, the middle movement of winter. The poetry is, it's freezing rain outside. I'm so glad I'm in my home
Mm.
with the fireplace. The peasants are outside freezing in the freezing rain. So I it started out with me reworking the poetry to match current, um, to I don't know, just to match current thoughts, protests, expressions that relate to similar topics. So for that one, it's like privilege lurks and looks. I'm I'm home in my books, cozy. And then the name of the in the song, you hear people like, there's snap pizzicatos and people stomping on the stage and banging. It's essentially people like banging on the doors to get into that warm place.
Mm. Mm.
So it's trying to use the Vivaldi's, name value. It's a kind of a little bit of graffiti on Vivaldi, honestly, using that name value to bring these conversations into spaces that are ideally for all classes of folks, but in the end, certain classes of folks end up sitting in those seats. So hopefully these topics are brought artfully and emotionally and to those folks, and there'll be a QR. So in addition to the reworking of the music, which is influenced by all my musical influences, all the stuff I was listening to with my dad and my mom, I also interviewed the unhoused folks of Phoenix, Arizona,
Wow.
how climate and climate change existentially impacts them on a day-to-day basis. And it's amazing the brutality of the stories that they've told. They're in a tent and then they wake up the next day and there's yellow tape around the tent next to them, or somebody has overdosed or something, and they didn't die from the overdose, they died because of exposure. They just stayed out in the sun. Or they're trying to find a cool place to be, and they finally find some water, but the water fountain's made of metal and it's exposed to the sun, the 110-degree sun, so it's actually scalding to try to get water. So there's water scarcity, there's shade scarcity. So there are words. So I'm saying this, and you might feel something, but when you hear them say it, they say it with such strength and dignity and hope. It's almost unbearable
So
to
these
hear.
recordings are a part of the piece.
And their words are permeating the piece throughout. Yep.
Wow, wow. How did you, what was the infrastructure to get you in front of these people? I mean, surely you just didn't walk the streets with a microphone, right?
No, I didn't. So Phoenix Symphony, their education department or their community engagement department, has a connection with the folks at Circle the City, which is an amazing organization that works to help folks experiencing homelessness. And so there are these, Phoenix Symphony, I think, sends musicians to Circle the City regularly throughout the year. I don't remember how often, maybe every month or even possibly every week. I don't remember how often. And so they have a relationship with those people, and they brought me in for one of those days as part of their Reverb Festival. So I went in on a Monday. We had an hour-long conversation that there was a wealth of, I felt horrible actually having to edit and cut out anything they said, but there was so much that they said that was amazing. So I then cut it up, and then we had our first concert, I think, on Wednesday. So I cut it up between Monday and Wednesday, and so their words are also used in the recording and the album that's coming out in June.
What did they think? Well, maybe, yeah, I guess two questions in one. Did they understand that what they were sharing would be a part of an orchestral work? And if they didn't
Yes, and
understand,
they came to the concert. They came to the concert of
wow,
concerts, and they stood up. Like, I walked out, and they stood up, and they were just like, and then they heard their own voices, and they after. I mean, who knows what the real impact is, but in that moment after the concert, one of them came up to me and was like, "This is like one of the best days of my life. I actually felt seen
wow, wow.
in
Because
that concert."
you were talking about class, being one of these issues is something that I'm thinking about all the time when we talk about classical music. But
Mm.
at least in that moment, it seems like you were able to break down those walls and really make it an experience that was not predicated on how much money you have, what sort of clothing you have to wear in these spaces. It felt like, at least from my perspective, this seems like a vision for the future of this field.
Yeah, it's a vision. Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it takes a lot of work. I mean, it just takes will, honestly. I mean, it takes a lot of work to put on a Brahms concert too. So it just takes the will to do it and the time. I mean, it took many, many meetings to organize it, and we had to figure it out for the first time. But once you figure it out that first time, it's much easier. And Valerie Bontrager at the Phoenix Symphony is amazing. She was the will to make that happen. She offered up the idea, and then I was like, yes, of course. And then she just really pushed it and made it happen. So it takes will within the organizations to make it happen.
Yeah, you're saying something big there. I won't pull on that thread, but hopefully the people hear what can be extended from that for sure. I mean, it's exactly what you were saying earlier. It's not can I, it's will I.
Yes, will I?
So
Yes.
when I was reading about the description of this project, you use the phrase Afrofuturist meditation and dreamscape. What makes this Afrofuturist as opposed to just
Futurist.
quote unquote regular meditation and dreamscape?
I've been wrestling with that actually. Um, I'm trusting that my musical heritage and what I wanted to hear from that Vivaldi, what makes me want to dance, what makes me want to sing, what makes me want to move and feel, um, is steeped in the Black American experience, and so therefore that's the meditation part. But if if you just assume that, so here's me with my bullet holes against, but like if even if you just assume that wasn't correct, so there's like a backstory that I've come up with that kind of not incentivized, but kind of like a method actor. It helped me come up with the different decisions that I would make during the creation of the piece. So the idea is like, what if climate change has come and gone, and there's only very few humans left on the planet, and in my mind, I was just imagining Black folks. I don't know why. That's where my brain went. And the only thing they have, just because there's so few people, um, we are not in touch with our history anymore. The history is kind of like, and so all we can do is interact with this AI tool that tells us our history and actually helps us to deal with the horrors of our post climate change reality.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, and so, they discover music, and so this AI tool is actually telling this person what their history was so that they understand how to deal with um, the pain of their current, how they can deal with like being totally alone in the world post climate change.
Hmm.
Um, so um, it's Afrofuturist just because it's futurist, and it's of the Black experience musically for sure. And then this backstory, uh, hopefully, cause it to become even more futurist. That's what kind of guides the electronics and the sounds, and why people are being quoted, and why it sounds like found sounds and things like that.
Yeah, and I don't want to take for granted that the nature of this piece of music, the programmatic aspects aside, challenge what many folks, including many Black folks, think of when they think of this orchestral experience. And as I think we should be allowed to do, certainly in conversations like these, just really center Black communities for a second. So even within Black communities, there is this culture and this heritage and this legacy of quote unquote excellence that sounds like Florence Price, that sounds like William Levy Dawson. What you're bringing to the front does not sound like that. So I wonder how you think about an expansion of people's, even if only Black people's, conceptions of excellence within orchestral spaces
Hmm.
versus now.
Hmm. Whew. Um, I am constantly looking for ways to bring James Brown into my violin playing.
Hey,
I'm constantly looking for ways, Jesse Norman too, you know, but James Brown. I'm constantly looking for ways of finding John Coltrane's kind of like that grit that um and if you were to make that sound and it was the first time you were making that sound in your lesson, your teacher would probably tell you you were making a bad sound, an
Mm,
ugly sound. And I think because I didn't feel the freedom to even explore that, like those sounds are like I have this duality constantly where like when I'm improvising, I feel totally free. A lot of people that improvise actually don't feel free because they feel so scared of making wrong sounds. I feel so free to just make sounds I want to make that come from my what I'm hearing. And when I'm playing written music, I just don't feel the freedom. It's like, is it okay for me to make this very bluesy sounding moment in Leonard Bernstein sound like the blues? Am I allowed to do that? And I teach a class on how to do that at Juilliard, and I still am afraid of doing it.
mm.
So I'm not trying to teach anybody except myself that it is okay to hear what you're hearing, that it's okay to come from where you're coming from, explore things naturally, the way where you come from, and have the will to make it quote unquote excellent. And what I mean by excellent is just own it, to really own it and make the sounds that punch out and hear that sound like you.
I got to unpack because again, back to Nina Simone, I hadn't planned on thinking about her so much during the chat, but you're talking about how so many people who improvise don't feel free. She defined freedom as many people know as no fear. So for
Mm,
you to talk about freedom and fear in the context of improvisation, I can't help but to ask you, what is it that you feel like you're afraid of? Someone not
mm.
hiring you again, someone not understanding what you're trying to put forward. What is that fear that's keeping
Yeah,
you
so
from that freedom?
there's so much there's so much that's in there. Yeah. I mean, it's hard, it's hard enough to just record yourself and listen back to yourself and hear yourself at all.
Mhm.
And then to hear yourself and then hear it only sound like an exaggerated, weird version of something that you really love is it's like you get that like cringe feeling. It's like, when you listen to your own voice for the first time. Isn't there a word for that? There's like a scientific word for it. When you hear
I'm
your
sure
own
that
voice for the first time, you're supposed to cringe. And that's why a lot of people don't learn how to sing. They don't learn how to speak because when they do that, they cringe at their own voice and then they stop. They don't have that vision. Like similar, I'm just thinking back again to what we were talking about with my parents that, I didn't see them sing or speak much. And so I don't understand the power of that. And so there was something that really caused me to hesitate using my own voice, but it wasn't until of power when pandemic times, and I figured who's gonna kick somebody while we're all down, where I could really put that out. That gave me the impulse to actually use my voice and find something beautiful in my actual voice. And because of that, I felt more bravery to find something that I really wanted to do in my violin playing. That I didn't want to just sound like Janine Jansen or David Oistrakh, but I could find
as phenomenal as they are.
as phenomenal. Yeah, I would like to sound like them too. If I could just snap a finger and sound like that, I'd just be like, yeah, let's go. For at least for a day. Um, but Sister Rosetta Tharpe could, like how can we be in there? How do you get that grit and beauty and warmth all at the same time? How do you get that pain that Billie Holiday has? And she has this beautiful like honey quality to her sound. Like, how do we get that? How do we value that and actually learn how to do it on a technical level, um, as opposed to just trying to aspire to be um, whomever opera singer that we do?
And this is why I asked the question that I did earlier about your bringing blackness with you in your trajectory. So maybe it's not so much you're saying, "Oh, I'm a black man, listen to me," as much as much as it's black music is so rich. There's
Yes,
so much there, and we've ignored so much of it for so long. Maybe that's more of how I can think about blackness coming with you in your career trajectory so far.
sure. I mean, that's the natural way I think of it. I mean, I would hope that if we just expand to, you know, nobody comes from like classical Brahms. Like let's think about Brahms for a second. There are very few people who can somehow trace their lineage back to Brahms, other than maybe their parents played recordings of it at their house, or maybe there's some people who grew up and their parents were members of X orchestra and they played Brahms and whatever. There's so few people of the number of people who are studying classical music that have a cultural, really deep connection to that music. Other than that, they love it and like it, want to study it. Okay, that's fine. Um, why not? Why if why not connect to the music that you actually connect, like that you currently connect to, that you are coming from? Why not find a way to bring that with you into everything that you do? Wouldn't you then sound more authentic? There's a I teach a class, called the Performance Practice of the Blues, and there was a student there who I asked them to learn a work by American blues, and then I asked them to bring in a cultural something from their own culture that's quote unquote their blues, their folk music. And this student played an arirang from Korea on the violin, and she said it was the first time she had ever played it on the violin at all, ever. And it was at Juilliard, and she was so surprised that this would be the place to do it. And it actually happened to be one of the most convincing things that I heard her play.
Wow.
And it was the first time she had ever played it. Um, and that's just one anecdotal story, of course, but um, I just I think we would make better music if we could make music sound like ourselves.
Yeah, it's just that feeling. One of the things I'm always thinking about is the fact that if you go back into the Black church, even as it exists today, this is music that people are literally betting their souls on. Like there's no uh more visceral way, I guess, to describe the feeling that they put into that music, and
Oh
you
yeah.
hear it differently than you hear someone who's showing up to a gig
Mm.
and playing their part. So I guess to circle back to Seasons of Change, what are the feelings uh that you're hoping to put across? What are you hoping those of us who are going to be in the audience for Seasons of Change walk away with and take away, or maybe even do following the performance?
Mm-mm. Well, we'll hear the words of those folks experiencing homelessness. We will also hear the words of a climate scientist from Rochester and a climate activist from Rochester. And we'll hear the recomposed versions of Vivaldi, um, all weaving together. Basically, we start with summer, and we talk about it. Summer is all about how bad things are. Everything's bad, and then fall is more like making a way out. Winter is about just kind of the finality of everything. Like, what about when it all ends? And then spring is the hope that all these folks have. So, in fact, I almost feel like half of the population, some number of people don't believe in climate change. Okay, I'm not trying to convince them otherwise. I can't do that. But the people who do believe in not believe, but we know that climate change is a thing. I would say that a large percentage of those people have lost hope in the fact that something can change. And so I'm hoping that in hearing these sounds that, relate to the current day, relate to our culture, relate to ourselves, and hearing these words that are so deeply hopeful and deeply, I asked the people, can you alone change your world? And I was expecting them to say, no, we have to find hope. And they said, no, of course you can. You must be able to change your world individually to find something better. Like on an individual bit, you have to own it for yourself. So, and I'm hoping that hearing the hope of these people who are in this position, the position they're in, currently without homes, and feeling the sense of hope at that spot of their life, that we can also feel that hope as well. And so I'm hoping the music will, with spring being the final movement, I hope that will be a liftoff for folks to seek um, their local climate activists. Everywhere has local climate activists, where people petition their governments. People make it known what they can do where they are, because climate is something that affects every locality differently. They just have conversations with people on the street. Maybe there are artists that come to this concert who feel that they can do what I'm doing better. They can pick up the mantle and do it much better, and they will go do that. That's what I'm hoping will happen.
So you have of power, of love, of time is coming, and then maybe of hope.
Of hope. Yeah, there you go.
Well, how can folks keep up with what you're doing beyond the Gateways Festival? Check out some of your previous recordings and performances. Where do they need to go?
You can go to my website, curtisjstewart.com. I also have everything is up on Spotify. I can't remember if it's Curtis J. Stewart or just Curtis Stewart on Spotify, but either one will lead you to the right place.
Great, great. Well, I wanted to leave you with one question that sort of points back to what we're dealing with in our society today. Uh, the arts, generally speaking, are not under attack. I don't think it's fair for us to say the arts are under attack as much as we should be saying specific types of art, specific types of artistic expression are under attack. And in many ways, I would put Black music and Black art in that category. We've for generations talked about the power of music to bring people together, to deal with the challenges of society. But now that we're actually looking at it, we're looking at I'll say the word fascism. We're looking at that. What do you see as the role of artists? We can make this music, we can build these communities, but what comes next?
Mm. Yeah, I see art as the reminder that that there is more than just us as individuals. Because we're gathering, it's a reminder that there is a spirit that is beyond that hate that we are now experiencing. That we can gather not just individually as artists, but in collaboration, and in doing that in collaborating and becoming bigger than the individual, we are not more in danger, but less in danger. And that no matter how someone labels your work, I'm just remembering my first times creating. Going to uh, Pete's Candy Store in Brooklyn and doing violin duos with Jesse Montgomery and some electronics. We never did anything with that, but we didn't get paid. We just did it. And that spirit of creation is in the end what is the most important thing, and the thing that to keep our focus on, to create, and to express, and to find, to iterate so much that we find where our impact lies in the current climate. And that doesn't mean I find, like, looking up at all these institutions doing horrible things, that I'm afraid that people will feel stifled and feel like they should not create. And the only thing that does is that limits your voice from actually being out there. That means that they've won. And so for us to focus in on what we can do, just the little things we can do to create every day, and then reach out to someone else and just share it with someone and find a way to make it with someone else, you will start to expand out. And yeah, it's for me, I find it to be scary times. And it's there are also times that have happened before. The popular thing to look back to is the Shostakovich Russia era. There's all these times where people have created despite. Actually, I think of people like Prokofiev. I know Shostakovich is the popular one to think about, but if you look at Prokofiev, who remained very popular. Say it again.
I'm agreeing with you. Yeah.
Yeah, he and then when he died, I think he died on the same day as Stalin.
Right.
And people during that time saw him as a kind of cop out to that. So we're all dealing with a lot of complicated feelings. So I think just zooming in on just every day, how can you create something that day, even if it means changing one note of a score, or even if it means picking up the violin for 5 minutes, whatever it is, just keep making stuff. Because we're all tending that kind of unconscious garden. We don't know when we'll have the opportunity to really make a statement that is truly impactful.
Someday Glad I got that off my chest.
I hope Curtis doesn't kill me for sharing that one, the tail end there of a work of his called Love Shark. I actually stumbled on that recording by accident, but I think it's brilliant. So shout out to Curtis for all of his creativity, for all of his activism, and for his friendship. I consider it one of the honors of my life to get to share space with folks as brilliant as he is. I'm looking forward to tonight's event here in New York City to celebrate Curtis's Seasons of Change. Hopefully, I'll see some of y'all there. Say hello if you do see me. All right, so I'll try to be brief here for today's Triloquy. As I mentioned at the top, there's a lot of media out there right now that's trying to teach us how to resist, at least from my perspective. From The Handmaid's Tale, I think we're learning that there is no freedom for just a few. Either everyone's free or no one's free. From The Last of Us TV show, which is based on a video game that I played many, many years ago when it came out, I think we're learning that one person's sacrifice is another person's burden. In resisting against evil powers, there's often no clear right or wrong, just cause and effect. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, right? Through the show Andor, I think about what the broader Star Wars franchise teaches, which is that there's no person or no act too small to be of consequence. We all have our own mission that we have to accomplish, a mission that's uniquely ours, something else that's preached in my Buddhist practice. And then we have the movie Sinners, which, if anything, highlights the importance of knowing who's in your midst. Everyone can't be invited to the cookout or to the juke joint in this case, because it's easy for a space of refuge to become a space of disaster. I won't say anything else just in case some of y'all haven't seen it yet, but if you have seen it, I think you know what I'm speaking to. But the one through line that I've been thinking about is the fact that we often fail to consider what's on the other side of these things. And all the bits of media I've referenced, there's a clear example of what happens when folks go into their own corners and let it all burn down, or let them deal with it, or let them suffer. When characters lose interest or even lose the ability to push back by changing people's hearts, everything goes to hell and the oppressor not only wins, but thrives. I want us to think about this as we deal with our own political realities. I read just this morning that the administration is purging certain artifacts from the Smithsonian, starting with the 1960 Woolworth's lunch counter sit-in exhibit. I'll have a link in the description for you to take a closer look at that story, but this stuff is real. And, you know, if we do nothing about it toward the ends of changing people's minds and changing people's hearts, this new reality will thrive. For a long time, I was very much opposed to engaging people who I saw as too far gone. Uh, I'm thinking about the story, and I'm blanking on his name right now. There's a jazz performer out there. I'll find it and put a link in the description. There's a jazz performer out there who famously made friends with people in the Klan. I was even on a Zoom call with him once upon a time, and I remember when I first heard about that, I was like, "Oh, absolutely not! That can never be me." But but the fact of the matter is, white supremacy culture will survive the system failure. White supremacy culture will survive the revolution as long as evil thinking is present, the feelings that are deeply embedded in generational conditioning and training, the problems will always reemerge. So what does this mean? For me, it means that I have to find as much common ground with folks I don't agree with as possible. I'm making it a practice, for example, to really listen to people. And I know we talk about this a lot, listening, but really, what does it look like to truly listen to MAGA? What does it look like to make them feel our empathy? To someone close to you who's absolutely in line with the president and his actions, why? Have you ever had a conversation of why? Help them explain to you why they feel that way. Don't dismiss these people, because at the end of the day, we're letting something root deeper and deeper into our society. I said it on social media. Maybe I said it here, but I'll say it here again. We will not be saved in silos. As I think about things like the Gateways Music Festival, yes, I agree that there are spaces where marginalized people need to go to refuel and to grow. I go to an all-Black Buddhist retreat every year, so I definitely get it. But we have to remember to apply that spiritual renewal to the broader world that we have to engage. Women need their spaces, and you've got to engage the broader world toward change. Other racialized people need their respective spaces, and they have to engage the broader world toward change. My fellow members of the eligibility community, as we jokingly say, queer people, we need our own spaces, and we have to engage the broader world toward change. I hope my point is clear. We can't run to our corners and expect to create for ourselves everything we need. We can't sit at the top of buildings drinking coffee as the rest of it all burns. Maybe you've seen that image. We have to engage who we see as the enemy until we see them as our fellow human beings with whom all of our futures will be cultivated one way or another. I've started making sure that my social media engagement doesn't leave anyone feeling pushed to the side. And it's difficult when you're a person like me with certain beliefs and certain opinions, but that's just what it is for me right now. What else? I don't wear a kufiya because I don't want a Zionist to see me as someone they can't talk to despite my feelings against Zionism. I don't say F Trump because that ends any conversation I could have with someone who identifies as MAGA, just offering, again, some examples here. I don't blatantly express the fact that I believe classical music, as we currently engage it, is the artistic arm of Western white supremacy culture without also offering a context that allows for further discussion, even though that is how I see it. Shout out to all the orchestras out there and they're all white programming. They're all European programming. In Nichiren Buddhism, we talk about the fact that rules and regulations cause contradiction, but that there's never dissonance within one's life if they center the innate value of humanity. Do you value human life? If so, engage humans, all humans, through their humanity and lived experiences. That's our only way forward. But keep yourself safe at the same time. Don't just burst into the Klan rally or show up to the neo-Nazi meeting thinking that it's all going to be all right. You have to use your judgment when you're engaging humanism. It's just like the indigenous folks in Sinners. If there's clearly danger, mind your business for the sake of your ability to engage the next person the next day. Martyrdom isn't going to help anybody, is it? I mean, but even when we talk about bursting into these meetings, let's think about Fred Hampton, if you're familiar with his activism back in the day, and the way that he drew those lines. He built those bridges going into those Confederate meetings. Those maybe even they were neo-Nazi meetings. I need to do some more research, but that and that's why the U.S. government ended up taking him out, because he was really building that solidarity. What does it look like if we all take part in building that solidarity, even with folks with whom we don't agree, for the sake of this future, for the sake of changing hearts, so that there isn't any of this evil living and continuing to breed under the soil, only to crop up later on down the years as this president or this representative or this regulation or this purging of a museum. All of these things will eventually crop up unless we take them out from the root. And taking them out from the root, in my opinion, means really engaging in a way for all of us to think about what we're doing, what we're saying, and how we're operating a little bit differently. It's getting real out here, but I haven't lost faith yet, and I hope that you haven't either. All right, I think that's enough for me for today. I really appreciate y'all. Thank you to everyone who makes this show possible, and I'll share more with you again soon. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Peace.